Good morning, everyone. I'm Tara Rodriguez, Director of the Division of School and Program Improvement here at the Kentucky Department of Education. Joining me this morning are Matthew Courtney and David Melanti. They'll be presenting some information to you a little bit later. But thank you for joining us this morning. If you have any questions you'd like to ask during the webinar, please send me an email at the address shown on the screen. We'll try to answer your question during the presentation, but if not, we'll follow up with you afterward. And as always, the webinar will be recorded, and the recording and presentation slides will be available on our Documents and Resources page. If you missed the December webinar, you can access the recording and slides on the Documents and Resources page. During the webinar, we talked about revised allocations and the required evaluation of the Parent and Family Engagement Program. Since a lot of the information we're going to talk about today builds off the topics we discussed in the December webinar, I'm going to first take a minute or two to review the evaluation of the Parent and Family Engagement Policy and Program. Then Matthew will talk to you about evidence-based practices. After that, David's going to talk about the notification of tentative census poverty and hold harmless percentages that you should have received an email about yesterday. And finally, we have some updates and reminders to share with you. If you were able to watch the December webinar, you'll recall that we talked about Section 1116 of the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, about the requirement for LEAs to annually evaluate their district parent and family engagement policies. And we talked about some resources that you could use to help with conducting the evaluation. Today, we're going to look at the requirement you see in Section E here on the slide about using the results from the evaluation to design evidence-based strategies for more effective parent involvement and to revise, if necessary, the parent and family engagement policy. Matthew, a lot of your work at KDE has involved evidence-based strategies, and here we see the requirement to design evidence-based strategies for more effective parent involvement. Can you talk to us more about what evidence-based strategies are?
Yeah, thanks, Tara. I'm happy to. What you see on the screen right now is the ESSA evidence levels. And this is a document that's available on our Elevating Evidence or Evidence-Based Practice website here at KDE that breaks down the ESSA definition of an evidence-based practice into its 4 key components. This is the document I'm going to walk you through today as we review the ESSA evidence levels. First, I want to talk to you about where this information comes from. So what you see on the screen here are 5 headings, or 6 headings rather. The first 2 headings, all the information in these columns comes directly from the Every Student Succeeds Act. And the other 4 headings, all that information is pulled from the Code of Federal Regulations and the non-regulatory guidance using evidence to strengthen education investments. We've worked really hard in Kentucky to ensure that our evidence-based practice program is completely aligned to the Every Student Succeeds Act and to the Code of Federal Regulations. So you'll find that as you go through these resources that they align almost exactly with those federal resources. I'm going to start at the bottom of this chart and work my way up as we go through this discussion today. So ESSA Evidence Level 4, this is the least rigorous level of evidence that you're going to find in the Every Student Succeeds Act's definition. And Level 4 evidence under ESSA is called Demonstrates a Rationale. And a piece of evidence is said to demonstrate a rationale if it provides a logic model that suggests that a practice is going to work. What this means is that an abundance of research suggests that it's probably going to work, but we haven't actually tried it yet, and we haven't collected any data to prove that the practice is actually going to work. So that's what makes it a little less rigorous than some of the other options we're going to talk about today. Under our favorable effects column, and in other effects here as well, you can see that ESSA places an expectation back on the school or district that if you're using an evidence-based practice that falls in this level 4 category, that you're also evaluating that evidence-based practice along the way. So you're partnering with a university or a research team to help you understand whether or not that innovation is working, and if it's not working, you'll be willing to abandon it at the end of the year. If we go up a level of rigor here, we'll look at level 3, and ESSA calls level 3 evidence promising evidence. And a piece of evidence is considered promising if it's based on a correlational study design with statistical controls. So here's what that means. A correlational study tells us that students who had experience A also had outcome B. It doesn't tell us that experience A caused outcome B. It just tells us that there's a relationship. Students who experienced one thing all happen to have the same outcome. You'll see also on the chart that we're looking for statistically significant and favorable or positive outcomes, and that the outcomes of a study are not overridden by more recent or more rigorous studies. We want to always be using the most accurate, most recent, most rigorous research available when making our decisions. We're going to go up another level here to level 2, another level of rigor, and this is what ESSA calls moderate evidence. And a piece of evidence is considered moderate if it's based on a quasi-experimental study design. So what that means is that we have two groups of students. One group of students gets the intervention, the other group of students does not get the intervention, and at the end of the year we do fancy math to see which group did better. What makes it quasi-experimental is that those groups are previously assigned, so they could be classrooms or schools or districts. It's a little less rigorous than a level 1 intervention, which we'll talk about in a moment, because there's a lot of bias in previously assigned groups, and quasi-experimental designs don't allow us to filter out the bias. You'll see here again that we have statistically significant and favorable effects, and that we want to make sure that our effects are not overridden by something more rigorous or more recent. That's going to stay true throughout all of this work. And then in our What Works Clearinghouse column, we see that there's an expectation placed that the research meets the What Works Clearinghouse standards with or without reservations. I'm not going to talk about that today, but we have lots of resources to help you understand the What Works Clearinghouse information on our website. Finally, in the last column, we want to see that it includes a large sample and a multi-site sample that overlaps with populations or settings. So basically, we want to be using research that's conducted on students like ours and in schools like ours. Level 1 evidence is the most rigorous level of evidence mentioned in the Every Student Succeeds Act, and a piece of evidence at level 1 is called strong evidence. Strong evidence is evidence that's based on an experimental study design. What that means is that we have two groups. One group gets an intervention, the other group doesn't get the intervention. At the end of the year, we do fancy math to see which group did better. The difference here is that we're going to randomly assign kids to groups. We're going to put all the kids in a school in a bucket, and we're going to say, this kid gets the intervention, this kid doesn't. This kid gets it, this kid doesn't. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to filter out all of the bias that goes into assigning students to schools or classrooms. So it gives us a little more rigorous picture of what's happening. We're also going to see here that we have the same expectation for statistically significant and favorable results, as well as sample size and overlap, as well as What Works Clearinghouse standards. So all of those components are going to stay the same. The most recent, most rigorous research on kids like ours in schools like ours. That should always be our goal. Level 1 should always be our goal in making these decisions. I want to talk to you briefly about meta-analysis. Meta-analysis are commonly used research methods in education, and basically what happens in a meta-analysis is a researcher takes all of the studies they can find on a topic, and they put them together to combine them to create a single statistical outcome or result. This is really popular in Kentucky, especially in schools who are using the work of John Hadding or the work of Marzano. They do a lot of work with meta-analysis. Meta-analysis are not explicitly discussed in the Every Student Succeeds Act, so Katie had to do some thinking about what we're going to do with those, and here's what we've decided. Meta-analysis are going to be treated the same way you would treat the body of literature that makes up the meta-analysis. It would be very unusual for a researcher to make a meta-analysis that combines qualitative and quantitative research, or correlational studies with experimental studies. And that would be very unusual. Generally, they're going to say all experimental studies or all correlational studies in writing a meta-analysis. So we're going to treat a meta-analysis the same way you would treat any of the studies within the body of the meta-analysis. So that gives a little more flexibility for schools to use some of that research that is out there and that they're familiar with. So Tara, I'm going to turn it back over to you for questions.
Thank you, Matthew. That was great information. We do not have any questions that have come in yet, so we will move on to our next, we'll go on and build off of what Matthew's talking, and keeping in mind these levels of evidence that Matthew just explained. Let's look again at what the Every Student Succeeds Act says about evaluating the district parent and family engagement policy. Remember, as we saw earlier during the presentation and in the December webinar, the annual evaluation also includes identification of barriers, needs, and strategies, and using the results of the evaluation to design evidence-based strategies for more effective parent involvement. To help guide you as you're working with evidence-based strategies, I'd like to share a non-regulatory guidance document with you. This is the guidance that Matthew referenced back earlier in his presentation. This guidance document will walk you step by step through selecting, planning, implementing, and evaluating your evidence-based strategies. This guidance is not specific to parent and family engagement. Instead, it focuses on the processes around evidence-based practices, and it provides a lot of guiding questions and context for the work. The diagram you see here on the slide is in the guidance document, and as you can see, it is a continuous improvement process. There are sections on each of these steps in the guidance document, and I want to take a few minutes to go over some of the highlights from these sections. So first, in our case, since we're talking about evaluation, we're really starting with step 5. This section in the guidance document compares and contrasts performance monitoring and evaluating effectiveness, and it provides a list of questions that can help guide these processes. A few examples of the types of questions you'll see in this section include: what are reasonable expectations of success, and how can success be measured? What have participants, for example students and educators, shared about their experience and how the strategy was implemented? And based on information, should this strategy continue as is, be modified, or be discontinued? So you can see these are all good examples of questions to ask when evaluating effectiveness. If you remember, we looked at some other guiding questions in the December webinar that can also help facilitate the evaluation. After the evaluation, we would go to step 1, which is identifying local needs. This section of the document discusses the importance of engaging with a broad range of stakeholders and examining the data. Again, there are questions to ask and answer in this step, like what data are needed to best understand local needs and root causes? How should needs be prioritized when several are identified? Some of the questions have to do with student performance, which you could answer, and you might also add some questions specific to parent-family engagement. The second stage of the process is selecting relevant evidence-based interventions. So there's discussion in this guidance document about the strength of evidence to support a strategy, as well as the local capacity to implement a strategy successfully. Guiding questions have to do with the evidence that is available to support the effectiveness of the strategy, the resources that will be required to implement it, and how success of the intervention could be measured. Step 3 of the process suggests some areas to consider when developing a plan for implementation of the strategy, like creating a logic model, setting goals, and defining roles and responsibilities. In step 4, the plan is implemented, and the guidance emphasizes the importance of collecting data and information about how well the strategy is working, so adjustments can be made if needed along the way. And you heard Matthew reference that as well when he was talking about the level 4 evidence. And then that brings us back full circle to step 5, examine and reflect on the effectiveness of the strategy. So you don't have to use this process, but if you have your own evaluation process, I'm sure you'll probably see some similarities with this one. Whatever the process you use for evaluation and for designing evidence-based strategies for more effective parental involvement, remember the importance of documentation. You'll need to collect and maintain the data on your parent and family engagement strategies as you monitor the implementation of the strategy, so when it's time to evaluate effectiveness of your policy and program, you'll have that available. You should also keep documentation of the evaluation process itself, such as agendas and minutes of any meetings you held, evidence of the process you used to evaluate the data, the key findings from the evaluation, and document any changes you made to your parent and family engagement policy and program as a result of the evaluation. This documentation not only will be a big help in case you're monitored, but perhaps the most important benefit is that you'll be improving the effectiveness of your parent and family engagement program in a systematic way. Hopefully this information, along with what was provided during the December webinar, has been helpful, but if there are any other questions you'd like us to check on, please let us know. And now David has some information that he's going to share with you about the tentative census poverty and hold harmless percentages that you received notification about.
As Tara said, you should have received that notification yesterday or through one of the previous Commissioner Monday emails. We really want you to take a look at that notification because it provides you lots of information pertaining to your next year's Title I Part A allocation. Particularly, it talks a little bit about how child counts are produced. Those are referenced as formula children in the notification. It talks a little bit about how funds are distributed to districts based on allocation formulas, and there are actually 4 allocation formulas, each with its own qualification criteria that feeds the Title I Part A allocation your district receives. It talks about hold harmless limitations and gives you not only poverty counts that are estimated for your district, but poverty percentages, and it also has on there last or the current year's final poverty count or percentage for comparison purposes. So we're going to ask you to do a couple things with those for the benefit of your district. Number one, read through there and kind of go through the information and see what's there, the definitions. It'll help build your capacity and understanding for how allocations are made to your district. Secondly, take a look at your formula children counts and percentages that are estimated for next year's allocation. That'll give you an indication, if you look historically at data, whether your allocation may be going up or down for the 2021 school year. There is a challenge process that allows you to kind of question the Census Bureau's numbers, which is included in the information. I'll caution you on this. The Census Bureau generally will not take challenges unless, or will not change numbers unless they find there's human error in data input. However, if you take a look at the numbers that are presented for your district, and you see that there are significant changes based or in comparison to trends that you see within your district, that might be a red flag to institute a challenge to the Census Bureau. If nothing else, it will kind of build your understanding for how those numbers are produced. I want to just say that those numbers are not actual counts of kids within your district boundaries, but they are estimates produced by the Census Bureau that USAID will use to produce allocations across several programs. So they're not actual one-for-one counts, but they are estimates. The second thing you can do to prepare for next year and to start planning and communications within your district is to use the hold harmless percentage reported for your district to calculate the rock bottom dollar amount of Title I dollars your funds or your district could receive next year. And the way you do that is you take the current Title I Part A allocation, so the 1920 allocation, times your hold harmless percentage, and that will give you your lowest, your rock bottom dollar for 2021. That's very helpful to start conversations with principals, to start planning budgets. If you start that early, you're better off in not waiting till the last minute until you actually receive an allocation. If there are any questions about that census poverty notification, you may forward those at any time to me through email, or you can give me a phone call. The number is 502-564-3791, and just ask for me. And otherwise, Tara, do we have any questions at this point?
Well, as of a few minutes ago, we did not have any questions, but my email has suddenly closed up. So if we have any, we'll be sure to get back with you on those with some answers. But thank you for that information, David. And now for a few updates and reminders. First, The January newsletter will be emailed to you soon. One item that you'll find in the newsletter is an announcement about a new consultant, Elise Crisp, who recently joined our team. She'll be working with Title I Part A, and she will be supporting the Homeless Education McKinney-Vento program. She'll be working with districts within the next few weeks, and if Elise is assigned to work with your district, you'll receive an email of introduction from her. Also, Jennifer Aiken is moving to a new role in KDE as of February 1st. So beginning next Monday, please send any correspondence you would have sent to Jennifer to David Melanti. And connecting back to the information David provided you about the notification of tentative census poverty and hold harmless percentages, Census Day will be observed nationwide on April 1st, and of course that date will soon be upon us. Our October webinar contains some slides on the importance of the census. Remember, the 2020 census count impacts the federal funds that communities receive each year for programs and services that are critical for schools, students, and younger children, such as special education, Head Start, after-school programs, classroom technology, food assistance, including free and reduced price school lunches, and more. The Census web page for educators, which is linked on the resources slide, which we'll see in a minute, provides new statistics and schools resources that spotlight the 2020 census and the importance of counting everyone, especially children. And here are some resources that we've referenced in this presentation or that you might find helpful. You see here a resource from Tennessee. If you are revising your parent and family engagement policy, or if you are going to be evaluating and taking a look at that in the next few months, you might check out this guide. It's nice. It's got some checklists in there for some things to look for. Of course, we looked at the Georgia Department of Education Family Engagement Guide during the December webinar. That has some good information in it as well. The KDE Evidence-Based Practices webpage, there is a button that you see pictured here that's on that webpage if you need technical assistance with your evidence-based practices. That will send a notification to Matthew to contact you. Of course, your Title I Part A consultants are always a good place to reach out to for assistance or for questions. The non-regulatory guidance document that I talked about during this webinar is linked here as well. And then last, the Census Bureau Statistics in Schools webpage as well. And when we have this presentation posted, these are all live links that you'll be able to access. So one last thing, if you're going to the National ESEA Conference next week in Atlanta, David, Matthew, and I and several people from the office will be attending, and we hope to see you there. Thanks for joining us this morning. Hope to see you next month.